Many years ago, in a remote village of Ajani, lived a beautiful young lady named Nkechi. Nkechi was the only daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Udu. Udu was very wretched. His only means of survival was a small plot of land he had inherited from his late father. He cultivated the land diligently and sell whatever crop he had harvested at the village market. His wife, Norma, was a full-time housewife with no source of income or occupation. One day, Udu became very sick. With the little money he had saved from his farming business, Norma bought some medicine from the village pharmacy. However, days later, his condition worsened and Udu became so weak that he could no longer stand. So Norma and their only daughter Nkechi decided to take him to the village clinic. Upon their arrival, the doctor referred them to a bigger hospital, explaining that Udu's case required urgent attention and that their clinic lacked the necessary equipment to treat him. His wife and daughter took him to the hospital they had been referred to. After making the required initial deposit, the doctor examined Udu and called his wife aside. "Madam," he said, "your husband's condition is very severe. We need to start treatment immediately or we might lose him. Please go to the cashier and make an additional deposit of 350,000 naira so we can begin right away." "God forbid," Norma said. "I will not lose my husband. Doctor, please start the treatment while I run around to gather the money, but please begin immediately." "I am sorry, madam," the doctor replied firmly. "We can only begin treatment once the payment is made. This is not a charity organization." Norma and her daughter Nkechi left the hospital in a state of confusion, not knowing how they would raise such a large sum of money. Norma began to contemplate what to do. She decided to approach Akolisa for help. Akolisa was the wealthiest man in the community. He has many farmland and a large herds of cattle. He was married to 2 women and had many children. When Norma arrived at Chief Akolisa's house, she greeted him and said, "Good afternoon, my husband." "Good afternoon, my wife," Chief Akolisa responded. As it was customary for men in the community to address married women as "my wife." "How are you?" he asked. "You have come to see me on this hot afternoon. I hope there is no problem." "I hope all is well," Chief Akolisa inquired. "All is not well, Chief. All is not well," Norma replied with distress in her tone. "Tell me what the problem is. How is my brother Udu?" Chief Akolisa asked with concern. Norma took a deep breath. "My husband Udu had been seriously sick for some days now, so I decided to take him to the hospital. When I noticed he was not improving with the drugs I bought from the village pharmacy. Now, the hospital is demanding a deposit of 350,000 naira before they could begin treatment. So I have come to ask you for assistance. Please lend us the money. As soon as my husband is discharged from the hospital, As soon as my husband is discharged from the hospital, he will work hard and repay you. Chief Udo clears his voice. My wife, Chief began, I have heard what you said. I will give you the money for your husband's medical expenses, but on one condition. The moment Norma heard this, she jumped up in excitement. Chief, please name your condition. I will do whatever you said. Just give me the money to save my husband. I don't want him to die. You will give me your daughter in marriage if you fail to repay me, Chief stated firmly. Norma was devastated by the condition Chief Akolisa had given her. She sat in silence for a while, confused about whether to accept the offer or decline it. Meanwhile, Nkechi was deeply in love with a handsome young man named Ejike. Was the son of Agumba from a neighboring community. Nkechi and Ejike had been dating for some years and were planning to get married before Udo's unfortunate illness disrupted their plans. After sitting quietly in confusion, Norma finally spoke. Fine, give me the money. If we fail to repay, I will give you my daughter Nkechi as your wife. But I am certain we will pay you back. Once my husband is out of the hospital, he will work hard and return your money. He's a very hard-working man. Chief Akolisa stood up, entered into his room, and returned with a paper and a pen. He documented the agreement and asked Norma to sign. Norma signed, and he counted 350,000 naira and gave to her. Norma went home in excitement. She quickly prepared food, dished some into a food flask, and headed straight to the hospital. Together with Nkechi, they were both happy that they were able to raise the money for her husband's treatment. Norma decided not to let her daughter Nkechi know how she obtained the money. She intentionally didn't want to let her know that Akolisa lent the money to them with condition that he will marry her if they fail to repay the loan. She did not want to disturb Nkechi with such a heartbreaking news. She strongly believed that once her husband recovered and out of hospital, he would repay Akolisa and the marriage agreement would not hold. At the hospital, Udo was lying helplessly on the hospital bed. He had not been attended by neither the doctor nor the nurses because they are yet to make the required payment. Norma approached the cashier's desk and handed over the 350,000 naira that Akolisa had given her. Immediately, the doctor began the treatment. Norma and Nkechi sat on a chair beside Udo's hospital bed. Norma pulled out the food flask containing the meal she had prepared for her husband. She carefully dished some into a plate and served it to Udo. Norma gently helped Udo to sit up so he could eat. Meanwhile, Udo was worried and anxious about the money his wife paid for his treatment. Where did she get such amount of money within a short time? I hoped she had not done something stupid. These thoughts weighed heavily on him as he pondered in silence. Norma, my wife, Udo began, his voice filled with concern. Where did you get the money for my treatment? I am sure I did not have such amount at home. My husband, Please eat your food. Don't worry about how or where I got the money. What matters most is that we now have the fund for your treatment, Norma said. Udu took a deep breath and began to eat, but he only managed a few spoonfuls as he still didn't have much appetite. Norma urged him to eat more and said, "My husband, please try to eat a little more. It will help you recover faster." Udu ignored her and lay down again. The door opened, and a man dressed in black trousers and white shirt, with a stethoscope hanging around his neck, walked in and greeted them. "Good afternoon, madam. I am Dr. Eze. I'll be taking over from Dr. John, who was on duty when your husband was brought in by you and your daughter." He turned to Udu, who was lying helplessly on the bed, and asked, "How are you feeling today?" "I am fine, doctor. I am fine," Udu managed to reply, with pain on his face. Dr. Eze examined Udu with his stethoscope. The doctor opened one of Udu's eyes to check his pupil, and then turned to his wife. "Madam, we need to run PCV test on your husband. I believe he might be low on blood." Norma and her daughter immediately stood up, tension written across their faces. Without hesitation, Norma went to the cashier and handed over her last 2,000 naira she had planned to use to buy foodstuff on her way home. The test was done, and few minutes later, the result came out. Udu's blood level was at 10%. The doctor took Norma aside and softly said, "Madam, your husband's blood level is quite low. We need to perform an urgent blood transfusion to save his life." Norma became distressed. She said, "Doctor, I and my daughter can donate blood for my husband. Please check our blood. Whichever of us has the same blood type with Udu can donate. We don't have money to buy from the blood bank," she said with a trembling voice. "All right, follow me, madam," the doctor replied calmly. He led Norma and her daughter to the lab, and their blood samples were taken and sent for analysis. Norma and Nkechi's blood type did not match Udu's blood. The doctor invited Norma into his office and said gently, "Madam, your blood type did not match with your husband's. You will need to pay for 2 pints of blood so we can begin the transfusion immediately." Norma broke down in tears. "Doctor, we don't have any money. The 350,000 naira initial deposit was a loan from one of my husband's kinsmen. I don't have anyone to turn to for help," she cried. "Madam," the doctor said, "there is no time for tears. You need to quickly find a way to get the funds, or we might lose your husband." "No, doctor, my husband will not die," she said, standing up. She left the doctor's office, her mind racing as she thought about where to find the money. "Nkechi," Norma called, "stay with your father while I go find the money for the blood transfusion." Norma left the hospital and began to go from house to house seeking for help. She reached out to all her relatives, begging for money, but all of them said they can't help, recounting their own struggles. Exhausted and tired, Norma returned to the hospital. As she approached the hospital, she heard the sounds of people crying, and that triggered anxiety in her. Her heartbeat began to beat fast. She ran into the hospital and went straight to the ward where her husband was. There she met Nkechi crying, while two nurses tried to calm her. "What is going on here?" Norma inquired, her voice filled with confusion. She went to the bedside and touched her husband. Udo was gone. Overwhelmed with grief, Norma collapsed on the floor, crying uncontrollably and refusing to be comforted. She remembered the agreement she made with Akolisa, who lent her 350,000 naira for Udo's treatment, and she cried the more. Will Norma be able to fulfill the agreement she made with Akolisa? And will Nkechi agree to leave Ejike, the handsome young man she had been betrothed to, in order to marry Akolisa, a man old enough to be her father? To find out what happened after Udo's death, stay tuned for part 2 of this story. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe.